When you hear the word, not the word, but the phrase, David and Goliath, what comes to mind? When you hear David and Goliath, what comes to mind? Underdog? Big versus small? Wisdom. Courage? Throwing stones. You grew up in the township, ne? That's what I would think as well, you know. All those words are very correct because the story of David and Goliath has been told millions of times over the last 3,000 years. It is the ultimate story of how the underdog defeats the giant. That term, David and Goliath, is the best metaphor for describing how a weak party can overcome a much stronger foe. If you've been in church for any period of time when 1 Samuel 17 was being taught, you'd have heard sermon titles like Facing the Giant. What's the Goliath in your life? Or my favorite one, Go Get Yourself Some 5 Stones. You know, all these messages are speaking to you about your personal Goliaths. And your Goliath could be your unreasonable boss, your debt, the addiction you can't beat, relationship problems, and all you're told is fight like David, fight, fight, fight. And such messages are helpful because we know as we live in Joburg that we will come across giants, right? And we need some encouragement for somebody to say, hey, you know what? Sometimes when life hits you, you must hit back. Don't shrink. But most often, such sermons are incomplete. Because when you leave on Sunday and you get to Monday and the giant does beat you, when you've been trusting that I am small and my boss is horrible and then you get fired and you don't even get the bonus. Your debt doesn't clear. That addiction comes back time and time again. That relationship fractures and is ultimately broken. You know what people do? They tend to walk away thinking that their faith wasn't strong enough. I didn't David enough. That's why my giant beat me. This morning I want us to go a bit deeper into this text. Not just walk away with me and my giant, but just to really understand what would God have to say to us through this great story. I want you to walk out of here this morning with encouragement, with courage, but I also want you to know the following, that yes, we are called to fight, but we need to know what are we fighting, how are we fighting, where and who we are in the battle. Okay? What are we fighting? How are we fighting? Where and who we are in the battle. That's what you should walk out with this morning. Chapter 17 starts with Israel's perennial enemies, the Philistines, coming over to them in the city of Soko. This was a town in the Israeli part of the nation. Saul, as we know throughout the previous chapters, is a warrior. So he gathers his army and they go and face the Philistines at Soko. As the two armies are facing each other, I'm sure, waiting for somebody to throw a stone or to shoot an arrow, there's just silence. Neither army moves until verse 4. Then a champion named Goliath from Gath came out from the Philistine camp. He was around 2.8 meters tall and wore bronze helmet and bronze scale armor that weighed 57 kilograms. Verse 6. There was bronze armor on his shins, and a bronze javelin was slung between his shoulders. His spear shaft was like a weaver's beam, and the iron point of his spear weighed 7 kilograms. In addition, a shield bearer was walking in front of him. Before we go into the text, let's deal with the giant in the room. Oftentimes when we talk about the story of David and Goliath, the first question I always get, and it's always from adults, never from kids. Kids are fascinated by this story. Adults always ask me, Pastor, is this description of Goliath true? Or is it just hyperbole? Is it an exaggeration? So to help you this morning, let's take a segue. What we do know from the text is that Goliath was from the town of Gath, where the tribe of Anakim lived. And it was a tribe of immensely tall people. In Numbers chapter number 13, when Moses sent out the spies, and he said, go and search the promised land. This is the report that he got back from those people. Numbers 13 and 33, which will go up on the screen. I'm going to paraphrase it. They said, as they come back to give the children of Israel a report, they say, everybody we saw was huge. Alongside them, we felt like grasshoppers, and they looked down on us as if we were grasshoppers. These were the people who lived in Anakim. They were tall people. Yes, maybe not all of them were as tall as Goliath, but they were taller than the average male. In modern times, we obsess with weight. How do I know this? As soon as your baby is born in the hospital, what do they do first? They weigh them. You've got a 6-pound baby. Oh, Jesus, help us. That's what happens. And so with human beings being obsessed with weight and weighing people, height and whatnot, what we know is this. In the last 100 years, we have a guy by the name of Robert Wadlow. He's the tallest guy to have ever lived in the last 100 years. His height was 2.72 meters. Not much shorter than Goliath, right? 2.72 meters. Next, we have out of Libya, Suleiman Ali Nashnoush. He was 2.5 meters tall, and he played professional basketball. So it's a cheat code. Pass him the ball. Finally, we have Odwad Bepre. He was a professional wrestler, the guy on the right, obviously. He was a professional wrestler, boxer, and strongman, and he had a height of 2.55. Okay, so he was not just tall and feeble, he was tall and strong. In fact, if you read his history, there were competitions where he'd go carry horses to show how strong he was. That was him, and he did this all within the last century. Right here in our continent, we have the Dinka people in South Sudan. You would have heard of them or read about them. And these guys are known as the tallest people in the world at this time. The average height for a Dinka man is about 1.9 meters. That's average, right? And the women aren't much shorter than that. And so, based on all that we know, our current history and what we do, it is plausible that somebody of Goliath's height lived at the time. And of course, that environment was much cleaner than our environment today and healthier. So he lived at that time. That's to all of you guys who are always asking, is it hyperbole? No. It's true. We're not trying to exaggerate. It's exactly what happened. And so Goliath comes out, and he begins to shout out to the nation of Israel. And he says, guys, let's not waste time fighting between our two nations. I'm the champion of Philistine. You choose somebody else, and let us have a one-on-one combat. If I win, you become our slaves. If one of you wins, we become your slaves. He says in verse 10, then the Philistines said, I defy the ranks of Israel today. Send me a man so we can fight each other. That word defy there means to bring reproach, to blaspheme, to treat with contempt. Goliath was not just challenging the people of Israel, he was insulting their God. In other words, if your God is powerful and you are strong, come and fight me. As you read a chapter, we soon learn that this went on for 40 days, twice a day. He'd come out and say, send me a man, and he'd blaspheme against God. This is what happened. Verse 11 says to us, when Saul, who was king, and all Israel heard these words from the Philistine, they lost their courage and were terrified. Think about it. For 40 days, this guy comes out and he says the same thing. And the only responses you can give is what? Terror. By day 10, I'm sure the fear was real. We are really scared of this guy. By day 20, it was exhausting. By day 30, it was routine. But by day 40, this was just a soundtrack. It's just happening. Yeah. The blasphemy is happening, and we actually don't care because we don't know what to do. And we could sit here in judgment over those people, but I don't think we are very different from them. Because we live in a world where we've stopped noticing things. There's the casual profanity at work. The way the Lord's name is used as punctuation in movies, books, and everything else, and we no longer correct people. So it's kind of like, well, let it be. Purity in relationships is no longer something that we hold dear. Everybody's doing it. Let's just shack up and get the goods for free. So we aren't too different from them, that these things just become something that is running in the background and we carry on with our lives. When we come back to verse 11, I want us to focus on when Saul. This should make us think. Because Saul should have stood out. Saul should have done something, but he doesn't. What do we know about Saul? He was taller than everyone else in Israel. We know later that he had armor. Maybe not as sophisticated as Goliath's armor, but he had armor. In other words, if we look at Saul in Israel, this man was built to fight Goliath. 1 Samuel 9:16 says God chose Saul to fight the Philistines. 1 Samuel 8, the children of Israel said to Samuel, get us a king who will lead us where? In battle. So they have a king who's supposed to lead them in battle. They have somebody who's been appointed and anointed to fight Philistine, but where is he? He does the exact opposite of what they wanted a king to do. Saul in the natural had the height, he had the position, he has the posture, he has the mandate, he has the armor, yet he does not move. Because the truth is that the presence of God had left him. And without the presence of God, all his natural qualifications did not give him the courage to do what God had called him to do. Instead, he's found to be a man paralyzed by fear. He's back to being that guy who's hiding behind the baggage. And so the army's afraid, the king is afraid, blasphemy is going on day after day. But then in the midst of this paralyzing fear, a young man, a young shepherd boy, walks in. And in verse 17, one day Jesse had told his son David, take these 22 liters of roasted grain along with these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to the camp. So he was like, hey, go do an Uber Eats, man. Just stop being lazy here. Move. Also take these 10 portions of cheese to the field commander. You know, when I read this portion, I know the dad was trying to bribe the field commander. Don't put my sons at the front of the line. You know, just say some cheese for you. Check on the well-being of your brothers and bring a token from them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. So David got up early in the morning, left the flock with someone to keep it, loaded it up, and set out as Jesse had charged him. He arrived at the perimeter of the camp as the army was marching out to its battle formation, shouting their battle cry. Do you hear this? The army is carrying on as if nothing weird is happening, right? Israel and the Philistines lined up in battle formation, facing each other. So these guys were ready for this war, but not ready for the battle with Goliath. David left his supplies in the care of the quartermaster and ran to the battle line. When he arrived, he asked his brothers how they were. Verse 23. While he was speaking with them, suddenly the champion named Goliath, the Philistine from Gath, came forward from the Philistine battle line and shouted his usual words, which David heard. These guys were getting ready to fight. I'm sure for like the 80th time. When all the Israelite men saw Goliath, they retreated from him and terrified. Can you imagine? Every day, you're getting ready to fight, Goliath comes out, you retreat. You're getting to fight, Goliath comes out, and you retreat. We learn in the passage that over this 40-day period of going out to fight and coming back to retreat, Saul had given or promised a prize to the man who would fight Goliath. He promises three things. One, I will make you very rich if you go fight Goliath. He doesn't say survive. So even if you died, I'm sure you get money. He says, go fight Goliath, right? Number two, you'd have to be alive to take this one. You can marry the king's daughter. But thirdly, also make the family of the man, or his father's family, wherever he comes from, exempt from paying taxes. As a Joburger, this would get me to go. Just this alone. No taxes, I'm there. And so Saul offers these three rewards to go out and fight Goliath. David was not there when this promise was given, so when he hears Goliath's words, the blasphemy that this man is spouting against God's people, David asks this question: what will be done for the man who kills that Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Just who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? David is not asking about the reward because he wants it for himself. He is saying, in light of what I am hearing, in light of the blasphemy that I am hearing, somebody should have gone out long ago to sort this out. Because what we are hearing is against God. In other words, he's saying, gents, why are we still dealing with this? This shouldn't be an issue for us. And this is where we get our first observation. David has holy indignation. David is offended on God's behalf. Goliath's words raise an anger, an irritation in him. He has triggered that somebody would dare curse the Lord's chosen people. He says there in verse 26, defy the armies of the living God. To David's mind, Goliath serves Dagon. Dagon is a dead god. If you remember in 1 Samuel chapter number 5, the Ark of the Covenant was put in Dagon's temple, and what did Dagon do? He fell over. They put him up. The next day, what? They found him fallen over, all in pieces. So David says, but this man over here serves a dead God. Who do we serve? The living God. Yet here we are, for 40 days, the champion of the dead God is swearing at the champion of those, at the people of God who's claimed that their God is alive. How can you be silent if your God is alive and his God is dead? This is why David was offended. Verse 27. The troops told him about the offer, adding, that is what will be done for the man who kills him. As I said, David's question is rhetorical. Because in the text, we never see David taking the reward. If you read on a bit further in Samuel, you'd realize that he was even tricked out of one of the gifts he was supposed to be given. So this is how we should read or understand David's question. He's saying, guys, you mean there's a reward this large, and still no one is going to move? That you winning against this giant would be of benefit to you. So none of you even care about benefiting. You don't want to, it's like telling your kids to do a chore and you'll pay them. But they're still too lazy to do the chore so you can pay them. And so you ask them a question. Even when you have money on the line, you will not wash dishes. This is what he's saying. In David's mind, serving the honor of God was motivation enough. No money, nothing else on earth should motivate you, but just protecting God's honor. So when he asks this question, and he asks this question a bunch of times, it was an indictment on the soldiers. That Saul had to bribe you to do what a godly person should have done already. And how do we know this? Because his brother says to him in verse 28, why did you come down here, he asked. This is Eliab. Who did you leave those few sheep with in the wilderness? I know your arrogance and your evil heart. You came down to see the battle. And David says, but what have I done now? Protested David. It was just a question. Then he turned from those beside him to others in front of him and asked about the offer. The people gave him the same answer as before. I believe that as David is asking this question from one group of people to another group of people, and how he responds shames the army. It shames the soldiers. And so Eliab, trying to kind of like make the situation okay, I'm sure everyone's saying, why is your brother saying this to us? Okay. He's our baby brother. Can I handle him? And so Eliab says, hey, little brother, don't come here and make a fuss. Don't be a loudmouth. Just behave. Everyone is embarrassed because of what you are saying. But you see, Eliab's words don't come out in a nice way. And this is a warning to us. That sometimes when we have a great conviction from God or when we want to do great things, there are voices that will be critical of us. And sometimes, not always, sometimes criticism comes from people who are closest to us. People who know you well, they know your history, they know your failures. As Eliab says, who did you leave those few sheep? That's condescending. Who did you leave those few sheep with? He was reminding him, you must stay in your place. And so here's you, hey, God has told me to do this. And somebody says, really? You didn't even pass grade 12. I want to put you in your place. And that's in Eliab. But sometimes God also sends a Nathan. We'll get to this at some point. In 2 Samuel, Nathan speaks to David, and he uses the exact same words that Eliab uses here when he speaks to David then. But in that moment, the words that Nathan uses towards David are words to correct him, not to belittle him. So that says to us, in life, there are people who will come and want to put us down, but there are people in life who also come who want to grow us. And so we need wisdom to understand when I'm hearing words, is it Nathan or is it Eliab? Are they trying to shrink me or are they trying to help me? David recognizes rightly, like he will the second time as well, but he recognized rightly this time that you are trying to put me in my place, so what does he do? He just kind of brushes it off. What have I done now, he says. It was just a question. David's eyes are fixed on this giant who's blaspheming God. He's not going to be focused in petty little squabbles with people beside him. Don't get in the way of what I am called to do. Our second observation is ill-fitting armor. And so word gets to Saul that someone is willing to fight. And David is brought before the king. I find this whole scene with Saul fascinating. I find it comical, actually. He goes before the king, and the first thing that Saul says, he says, you are but a youth. And Goliath has been a warrior since he was young. In other words, are you mad? Why do you want to do this? David says to the king, your servant, verse 36, your servant has killed lions and bears. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. Then God said, the Lord who rescued me from the paw, then David said rather, the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. There are three things that I want us to pick up in David's answer. Because this is how David's faith was developed. This is what gives David courage to say what he's saying to the king. David, in answering Saul, speaks of a season of preparation. David doesn't just show up on the scene and say, I can do this. There was a scene of preparation when he spent time outside in the field looking after his sheep, where he was obviously practicing how to use his sling. He was getting closer and more intimate with God there. Next Sunday, those of you who are runners know this is Comrades Marathon. 99.8% of the runners who are running next Sunday are prepared. They are the people who denied and declined your invitations when you invited them to go out, who you will not see this week because they are running next Sunday. They had early nights so that they can wake up early in the morning and prepare for the biggest race of the year. They've been logging the miles so they can perform out in public. Because this is true, and we should all know this. Public victory is forged in private faithfulness. Public victory is forged in private faithfulness. Even in your jobs, you know that. You don't just get to a boardroom and sound smart. No, you spent endless hours when no one was looking at you, sweating so that you can appear clever in public. The hours that you spend when no one applauded you to prepare yourself for the moment. David speaks to his preparation. I was out with my animals. I was out doing what I was supposed to be doing. So he speaks of his preparation, but secondly, he speaks of his faithfulness. When David says that God rescued his sheep, he used the language that said, the Lord delivered me. He doesn't say to Saul, I'm experienced, I've killed things before, therefore I can kill this guy too. He says, when I fought against the lion and the bear, yes, I did, but let me acknowledge that there was a greater power at work, and it was the Lord. So I'm not just speaking based on confidence, I'm speaking to the faithfulness of God. I've seen him use my skill and ability to conquer the lion and the bear. I was an instrument. Therefore, it is God's victory. He doesn't just say, I've done hard things before. He says, no, God was with me. Listen, faith always says, God was with me. Therefore, I can trust that God will be with me in the future. So he speaks of preparation, of faithfulness, but thirdly, he speaks of escalation. First there was the lion, then the bear, and in his wording, he includes Goliath. He says, this Philistine. In David's mind, there was progression. I saw God with the lion, I saw God with the bear, so God will be with me even now. Those previous fights were rehearsals for what will happen today. He took it as God growing his faith step by step. Trust me, if you are sane, you won't get on the comrade's path next Sunday. You do the 10-kilometer, 21, a marathon, an ultra-marathon, and hopefully then you can say, okay, I'm ready. As some people say, there's degrees to this. There's levels to this. David understood, I am at my next level. Faith has levels to it. Some of us, the first time we actually pray for something, we pray for a big thing. Oh God, give me a job that will pay me R1 million as my first job. I'm in varsity last year. When it doesn't happen, oh, God doesn't answer prayer. No, your faith is there. This goes by levels. That's why Scripture says we grow from faith to faith. We trust, we believe. We trust, we believe. And as we grow in faith, even what we believe God for increases because we have seen God's faithfulness. We have been prepared all along. Therefore, when we are on the road to escalation, we can see and experience God's goodness. This is what David shows us in those verses. What I found comical about this is that as David is speaking, Saul, as a seasoned warrior, doesn't stop this boy and say, actually, let somebody else go. Let me go. It doesn't dawn on him that what this boy is speaking about is the same God that all of us believe in. I, as Saul, have also seen God rescue us from wicked people. Yet, he just says, God, go with you. Really? But I'm sure maybe feeling a bit bad, he says, hey, you know what, actually, in verse 38, then Saul had his own military clothes put on David. He put a bronze helmet on David's head and made him put on armor. David strapped his sword on over the military clothes and tried to walk, but he was not used to them. I can't walk in these, David said to Saul. I'm not used to them. So David took them off. Saul puts his armor on David. David can't work. It's like you putting on a brand new pair of shoes on race day. You're bound to get blisters. You're bound to break something. David, as a man who'd gotten to his position by faith, says, Saul, I can't use your instruments. Not because they're not effective, but your instruments are conventional. Your instruments are what other people use to get where they need to be. I have never used that before. Only God has been my support. Because the whole idea of giving David armor was to protect him from Goliath. And David says, but God has protected me thus far. I can't now move my allegiance from God to an armor that I do not know. There's a lesson here for us as well. You see, there's nothing wrong with having a good education. Amen, bless God. As I look across this congregation, this is what I know for a fact. We have the most master's degrees per capita. This church, master's degrees come a dime a dozen. Which also says we're falling behind on PhDs and doctorates. Come on, Mazalwane. Let's just take things another level. Yeah, 2 is not enough. 3 is not enough. We need to go. Let's move on. Here is the issue. When we primarily rely on our qualifications and our connections, we are putting on conventional armor. We are doing what the world does. Think of some of you who were Christians when you were in varsity. People said you were too dumb to take some of the courses that you took. But God. You will never go far in this industry because people like you never do. Some of you are actuaries today. It was not because you were clever, but God was there. You know the endless nights you'd be texting people, please pray with me about this, and that. They said half the class will fail and there were only 2 of us. So they were talking to me. You know. But now that you're qualified, you want to leave the God who's been faithful and rely solely on the armor of the world. Now you think your masters, your MBA will get you into places, and you've left God. David says, I can't rely on that. I can't. Because I have a track record with God. I have a track record with God. I'm not going to abandon what God has done and taken me through. I will go with Him. This is a reminder for those of us who are Christians that, yes, even as we fight in this jungle of Joburg, yes, we need to prevail, but we cannot take up worldly things in order to survive. If we say we're Christians, we need to cling on to God, who is faithful. Because sometimes God's deliverance comes from places and spaces and from people no one else ever considered that they'd come from. Because in God's books, He wants the world to know that when you come up with a solution, but God. But God. And you will not say, it was my MBA that got me here. You will say, but God. This is the whole point of this. So in verse 40, instead of the armor, David takes his staff in his hand and he picks up 5 smooth stones in the riverbed. And we don't know why he took 5 stones. The text doesn't tell us. But maybe he was just being prepared. You know? and he put them in the pouch in his shepherd's bag. Then with his sling in his hand, he approached the Philistine. David goes down to the valley. Goliath looks at him and he is insulted that they would send a boy to fight him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come against me with sticks?" Then he cursed David by his gods. "Come here," the Philistine called to David, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts." This is an intimidating scene. If David was clever, he would run right now. But his response is the climax of this chapter. Because in verse 45, he says to him, "You come against me with a sword, spear, and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of armies, the God of the ranks of Israel. You have defied him. Today the Lord will hand you over to me. Today I'll strike you down, remove your head, and give the corpses of the Philistine camp to the birds of the sky and the wild creatures of the earth. Then all the world will know that Israel has a God, and this whole assembly will know that it is not by sword or by spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's. He will hand you over to us." Watch this and watch this well. All the reasons that David gives for fighting are not about him. Because he says, "I'm fighting so that all the earth will know that there's a God in Israel. I'm fighting so that the whole assembly will know that the Lord saves, not with sword and spear." But finally, he says, the whole point of this is for God to demonstrate that it is God who fights against those who are opposed to him. And even as we read David's response, we are tempted to tell each other, "Be brave, face your giant, believe in yourself," and with a sprinkling help from God. But what David is saying here is not that. He is saying the precise opposite. David is saying, "I save nothing. God is the one who saves." Why? Because the battle was never mine. The battle is not mine. Very strange to hear him say that, especially because of what he's about to do. In verse 49, David put his hand in the bag, took out a stone, slung it, and hit the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down to the ground. David defeated the Philistine with a sling and a stone. David overpowered the Philistine and killed him without having a sword. I love what one pastor says here. He says, David picked up 5 stones. A sensible person prepares. Faith is not an excuse for laziness. But then he says, but he only needed 1. The other 4 stones are silent witnesses to the truth that the victory was never in the slinger's skill. 1 ordinary stone because the battle belonged to the Lord. Last point. The champ is revealed. If we go back to the battle, we understand it was a single combat battle. One champion was fighting for its people, so was the other one. The whole time the battle is going on, what are the armies doing? Watching. Watching to see what would happen. I'm sure if as part of the Israelite army, I'd be like, my younger brother's out there. Yo. We're told in the text that the Israelites were already trembling. I'm sure this went up tenfold. No one lifts a sword. The army contributes nothing to the victory. But in verse 52, when David kills Goliath, we read and we understand that the Israelites stand up, they give a shout of victory, they run after the Philistines, they kill them, and they plundered their camp. This army that was terrified for 40 days enjoys a victory They had no part in winning. The champion won, but the spoils become theirs. Because somebody, a representative, was willing to go and fight. If you don't pick up anything from this message, pick up this. Here's the freeing truth. You and I are not David. You and I are not David. But let me help us locate ourselves. We are the army on the hill. We're the ones who are powerless, who are frightened, who are watching to see what the result of the battle would be. I know based on your churchology, you might view this as an insult, but it's not. Because truth be told, the gospel finds us exactly there. We were miserable, terrible, oppressed, depressed, unable to fight the enemy. David stands in the ravine as a son from Bethlehem, but 1,000 years later, a greater son from Bethlehem would be standing in the place of fighting. Jesus goes down into the valley alone, knowing that no one else can fight sin, death, hell, and the grave. Jesus wins. Jesus doesn't fight with the instruments of the world. He doesn't fight with might. He fights as a lowly person in apparent weakness. David used a stone and a sling. Jesus used a cross and a nail. Jesus struck the giant down. But here's what happens. You and I, just like Israel, get to look at the champion win and we celebrate what he has done. What does Paul say? He says Jesus Christ leads us, what? In triumphal procession. A Roman procession was the celebration of victory by a general that an enemy has been defeated. And as the general came into the city, people would shout and rejoice, not because they fought, but because you fought on our behalf. So Paul says, in light of what Christ has done, you get to enjoy the spoils of his victory. He won. You also win. But I know, church people, you still want to ask the question, but what about my giant? I face giants every day. Even tomorrow I'm going to face some giants. This chapter calls us to reposition our question. David's actions call us to reconsider that maybe the question is not, who's my giant, but it should be, who's my champion? Who's the champion? And as Christians, we understand that Jesus is our champion. Jesus is what? Our champion. And if Jesus is our champion, that means how we face our giants. Because life will present you with some hard things to tackle. We fight our giants from a place of victory because Christ has won the ultimate battle. Go with me to verse 53. It says, when the battle was over, we read this. When the Israelites returned from the pursuit of the Philistines, they plundered their camps. Then 54. David took Goliath's head and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put Goliath's weapons in his own tent. David takes the head of Goliath and he takes it to Jerusalem. That doesn't seem strange until you realize that the city of Jerusalem was a fortress for the Jebusites at this time. Israel didn't own Jerusalem. David would take over Jerusalem in 2 Samuel 5 when he becomes king. So why does he take a trophy to a place he does not own? Because David was planting a flag for a place that he did not yet hold. Because he was saying that the one who defied the living God is laid down as a marker for a kingdom that is coming. Yes, you can't see it now, but it is coming. Jesus says that the kingdom of God suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. What does that mean? It means that those of us who are part of the kingdom of God are always advancing the gospel of Jesus Christ. We're always taking over the territory, putting markers of the gospel in places that do not know Christ yet. That means when you face your giants on Monday, on Tuesday, what you ought to do is take the kingdom of God there. The rule and reign of Jesus Christ. That as a church in this city, we'll bring about the rule and reign through talking about salvation. But at work, we bring about integrity and hard work. In relationships, we bring love. Where there's sickness, we bring healing. This is how we take territory for Jesus Christ. I love how N.T. Wright puts it. He says, but the kingdom he brought was emphatically for this world, which meant and means that God has arrived on the public stage and is not about to leave it again. He has thus defeated the forces of both tyranny and of chaos and established in their place a rule of restorative and healing justice. In other words, we have a mandate as God's people to go about and do what our champion has already won. We bring about change. When the scripture says you're the light of the world, that is what we do. When I face my challenges at work, I think of how does light reflect? Jesus has already won. So you're not facing giants in as much as expanding the kingdom. Now the truth and the reality is that not all the things we face in this life will fall. Not all the giants we face on this side of eternity will be toppled. I want to reassure you that that's not a verdict on your faith. It doesn't say that you have little faith. It speaks to us living in a fallen world. Because we know that Christ has conquered all things, and he says, at the end of it all, we will reap the fulfillment of our salvation. What this text is calling us to is to place our complete and utter trust in God, not in ourselves, not in our abilities, but to say, God, in the world that I'm in, with the giants that I'm facing, would you reflect the champion's victory over it? That gives you a different perspective, child of God. You pray differently. You tackle the issues that you're facing very differently because you understand that the eternal battle has been won. Therefore, I don't fight in my own strength. I fight based on what he has done for us. The truth is, every Christian should declare each and every day that the champ is here. And I'm not him. And if the champ is here, it's going to be all right.